Everything is happening through these screens.
How are we getting the most out of that person?
I want to see this thing grow long term.
Amazing story. You have such a unique perspective on that.
Schedule a 2-week vacation.
I applaud those models.
Undervalue.
Secure your digital footprint as well.
Why were they even put in place in the first place?
Only the most adaptable survive. Let's get to the leaders list. Every leader wants to be tested until they are. Economic downturns expose cracks in the strategy, the culture, the leadership. The whole company goes under a white hot light. And when markets shift from boom to brutal, only the most adaptable survive. That's why navigating an economic downturn is on the leaders list this month, because it's a critical skill. And we're going to talk to Lawrence King, the CEO of Headstorm, who has had the wonderful luck of getting to manage through the chaos of COVID, as well as most recently a sector-specific downturn in IT consulting. He's got an incredible story and a lot to share. So I'm Bryon Morrison. Let's get to the leaders list. Lawrence King, welcome back to the leaders list. Great to have you.
Excited to be here. Excited to talk about this wonderful topic about managing a downturn.
Exactly. You know, I thought it was perfect to have you on this because we've known each other and worked together for a long time. And so I know that you have gone through macro and micro changes in business, right? You've seen the global impact of COVID-19 and managed through that storm. And more recently, you're going through the IT services industry that's experiencing a targeted slowdown. And so, you know, longer sales cycles, tighter budgets, it's everything's harder, right? Yeah. So I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you approach leading your company differently in a broad-based downturn like COVID versus an industry-specific one like you're going through today?
Yeah, I think they're a little different. Just to give you kind of a background on which you know, Bryon, but maybe for the viewers, kind of you think about the kind of the history of Headstorm, right? We scaled up pretty quickly. We went up and then we hit COVID and kind of paused and then shot up, almost to 21 million and then down. And so this is kind of a story and perspective of going up, down, again. And how do you manage through those peaks and valleys?
Yeah.
And so COVID was different because it was very acute, meaning business shut off immediately. Anyone that could cut their spending or, get out of contracts did. Some, depending on their industry, didn't. But it was, I think the difference is that it was across all industries for the most part. And so everybody was suffering. And it didn't last long. In reality, I went back and I looked at my financials for that year. It was only about 5 months of a downturn before clients in business started coming back. Yeah, with a vengeance, actually. But it was about 5 months that you had to weather. And then with PPP loans and the ERC credits and everything else, it really kind of did a good job of smoothing that out and helped you keep your employees. And so there was some assistance there, but it was very acute, as opposed to in this downturn. And I don't know if it's a downturn for all industries. I mean, it feels like it generally in consulting. For us in particular, we do a lot of work in agriculture, and agriculture is, if you take all the industries and say, hey, industries across the board are generally down. Agriculture was really down. They go into cycles of generally 9 years up and 3 years down. And so we are in our 3 years of down in agriculture. And our largest client really went down from stock price and a bunch of other stuff. So we got hit, pretty hard there. And the difference is it's very long. It's prolonged. It feels much like COVID. Not as severe, because I remember during COVID, is like we were calling everybody, past clients, future clients, trying to get business. Nobody was spending. There was a moratorium on spending across the board. In this regard, kind of in the latest downturn, there's not a lot of that. Clients will still spend a little bit of money, so you'll get something in, but there's no strategic large initiatives being launched. and there's a lot of tire kicking. So it's a very different market. The mindset of the client, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, is very different, but it's prolonged. And so you got to think this stuff started back in 23, kind of towards the end, mid 23. And, 24 was bad. And 25 has not really recovered from 24. There's some positive optimism, change in administrations for, politics, but that's about it. There's not a whole lot of evidence of anything really changing.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up because obviously with tariffs changing and geopolitical considerations, there's a discussion of do we go through another recession again, and does it become more widespread? And so I think everybody needs to pay attention to this right now, but specifically the IT services industry. I mean, like you said, you take that and then you match the ag industry, and those two downturns, that was really difficult for you. And specifically for Headstorm. So how do you get to, like, when you're in the middle of that and you're experiencing that, like you said, when it was COVID, it felt like it was forever, but it was no time at all. It was really, really short-lived. But I remember what that was like, because all of a sudden you just saw it coming around you and you were like, what is happening? Like, this is surprising to everybody, right? And so when you're in the thick of that, in the thick of the downturn, how do you start to figure out when it's time to stop playing defense and start building a path forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, are there specific signs that you look for?
Yeah. I got a lot of mixed signals on that. And so I took advice from COVID. So my perspective going into this time was, hey, you know what? We really kind of tried to manage the waves by reducing staff and keeping our costs in line. And because it shot back up in 5 months, I sort of regretted that. I would have rather maintained some capacity in hindsight, knowing that things were going to shoot up again.
Yeah.
I talked to a person that, and they were probably right when they told me, and I, this is a pretty respected business person. He said, you can't cut your way out of a recession. You have to sell your way out of a recession. And that has always sort of resonated in my mind. And so, and I heard that at the beginning of COVID, and certainly that was the case for COVID. This time around, in hindsight, I'm looking at that going, I don't know about that. I think that because this talk gets to being on the defensive or on the offensive. I was straight on the offensive. Right when this started. I had made investments in the reality show, UCC. I had made investments in hiring more leadership.
Yep.
I mean, I
ultimate
was
coding. UCC is the ultimate coding chip. Yep.
I'd opened the Costa Rica office. There's some other things that I made because I've gone over this list in my head before. So I was going in going, you know what? I'm going to power through this.
Yeah.
And I didn't power through it. What I ended up doing is blowing through lots of cash, millions of dollars in cash, and that I think was being on the offensive. And I think in that regard, I should have been on the defensive in the beginning, because now if you were to ask me that same person, if you were to ask me to reflect on what that guy told me back in COVID, hey, you can't cut your way out of a recession. You can only sell your way out. I think that you got to choose your timing. And I think that this type of cycle, these things, unlike COVID, these last a while. You're talking years. And you have to prepare for that. And so when I look back, all of that horsepower that I had on top of funnel and everything that we were doing there, it didn't move the needle a whole lot, because when you have buyers that aren't buying, or a market that's not buying, there's not a whole lot you can do except probably get on the defensive, manage your P&L to stay break even, and weather the storm and figure out where the market's going, right? Where are the opportunities? Because there's opportunities in every market. It's just finding them, finding the pain points in that market that people are willing to pay money for. And so that's what I would do differently there on that side. Kind of the offensive defensive piece
Yep.
is
Yep.
Is what I would do differently. And I don't ever really think that you get on the offensive in some ways. I mean, once you find the cracks and you kind of find the pathways. So after a year and you're constantly exploring the market and exploring customers and talking with customers and looking broadly and trying to figure out where the openings are, like a running back, right? You're trying to figure out, you're going to do bursts through little areas through the hole, and then you're going to reevaluate. And so in that way, they're little micro steps of being on the offensive, and that's being just tactical. And I think that's really smart. But there's the general awareness is cautious. And for me, I think it's just mitigating risk. Hey, I can shoot and try that hole. And if I get, smashed by a linebacker, it's okay because I can live another day and I have another play.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So really what I'm hearing you say is, how do you get to stable and then start to think about offense? How do you stabilize things so that you're not just burning through cash, but you start being, what's interesting about that though, Lawrence, is I was going to ask you specifically about your cash situation. Like, how did you manage, your cash? How did you manage your budgets? And I'm just curious, like, I know that you had set aside budget. Was that a good thing or a bad thing for you?
Yeah, I should have either distributed that or done something with it, but gotten it out of the company, because what it did was it actually gave me a false sense of security. And it allowed me to avoid making tough decisions because I had that security blanket that I would have otherwise made if I didn't have that.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about, because what it also does is it forces you to look at like marketing investments or sales investments or things like that and manage those more closely.
Right.
Like there's a responsibility in marketing to deliver tangible results, and there's a responsibility in your leadership team if they are, supposed to execute on something. It's easier to look at them in good times and go, it'll be all right. We'll get there next month.
Right.
Whereas when your back's against the wall, you force yourself to work a little bit harder and you expect those results. But do you get to a point where it's kind of going back to that question about, from panic to planning, right? I mean, where's that line between I'm responding to something I'm seeing in the marketplace versus this is the new normal?
Probably different for everyone. I think there's a lot faster learners than myself. So
I don't know that that's true, but you went through it with COVID and then you came through it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to see it faster? Were you able to see the effect of what was going on in the marketplace?
No. And, willful ignorance, maybe. I think this might be the curse of most entrepreneurs. Like, you have to be, what would I call it? You have to be overly positive all the time.
There's an optimism to it, right?
There is, man. It a lot of it is, I think the one quality that I think is required in most kind of entrepreneurial scenarios is resilience. You have to be resilient and weather the punches in good times and in bad times. And I think that requires a healthy dose of being overly optimistic. And that can be a curse and it can be a blessing. I think in the case of a market downturn, I had not, there were two factors. Number one, I'm going into it and I'm like, you know what? I'm smashing the pedal to the floor. I'm going after it. And I'm overly optimistic. Look at all these investments that we made, and man, the team's done a great job, and we got everybody, everybody's pulling on the same end of the rope. And I think that, that's everything about that is amazing, except, sometimes you just can't break through that that wall, and the wall being, you know, the downturn. I think the bigger piece of it though is I'd never, outside of COVID, I didn't have a business when and get a chance to go through any other recessions that, you know, or downturns that are elongated.
Mhm.
And as I was talking to some folks that are seasoned, been in business for 20 years, man, it was so enlightening listening to these folks, and they owned all different types of businesses, but every one of them preserved cash, was able to see some of this stuff happening, and knew what the consequences were, and knew that there was a long-term these things can have a long-term impact, and so they plan for it, and they run their business that way. So once you go through one that's elongated, not COVID, because that was sort of this anomaly for 5 months, but other ones like 2008, 2000, you have a different mindset, and so if you know, their first one, they probably were like smashing the gas pedal to the floor and saying, let's go. They got burned. And then the next time they're like, aha, all right, we're going to get on the defensive and be tactical. And it was really interesting listening to them. And every one of them were like, you could tell their first one, they were like, you know, going after it. And they're like, you'll learn. Well, lessons learned. They're hard lessons and they're expensive, but now you know it. And that was kind of their perspective. And it was really refreshing. So it's like, you know what? Yeah, now I know it. Wow. Okay. That was an expensive lesson.
Yeah. When you, like, can an economic downturn create opportunity for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's, you know, it's, I don't know, man, if I knew what that was, it would be really amazing. I think
well, you found that in some of the way that you've approached services, product mindset. You know, I know you are already, you're constantly thinking like that, right? What is the thing that you can do to affect this? Because some of this is beyond your control, right? You can do your internal operations and you can get that right, but the client mindset shifts also.
right.
And so, you know, when you've gone through this, how have you adapted to, you know, stay relevant and valuable to those clients as their mind shift has changed?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's where their pain is. The mindset of the client during a downturn is one of preservation, risk mitigation, just enough to get it done. They've got responsibilities. The way they're measured is different. In, you know, let's say in a good economy, the clients are going to be measured on innovation and speed to market and quality and all of that type of stuff. In a downturn, now, you know, the company generally and the executives are going to be preserving cash. The messaging down to vice presidents and directors is all the priorities have changed. Now it's about preserving cash and doing more with less, keeping the lights on, all of that type stuff. And when that happens, you know, depending on how you positioned your business, if you're on the differentiated side of that, so higher end, solving big problems, you need to figure a way how to find those problems that clients are willing to pay money for. And they may not pay what you would ordinarily charge, but they're still willing to pay, you know, pay it a reduced amount, but still willing to do the work. If you have a business that's more on the volume side, and you kind of focus in areas where, hey, we do things, you know, maybe less quality, but faster or cheaper, that type of thing. That's your market. So right now, you know, that it's kind of playing into your strengths. And so it's a matter of finding, it really depends on how you're positioned. We were positioned as highly differentiated. So, you know, fairly, you know, everything was high end, speed to market, quality. The overall client experience is you know, first class. Client mindsets at the time, they're not really willing to pay for those things because they're not measured by that. They're measured by their P&L at the end of the day. And so they're okay with just keeping the lights on. So it's about finding those opportunities that they are willing to pay for that. And there's not a lot of them. You might be able to displace some folks that have pre-existing engagements. You might be able to displace them there. You might be able to do some more advisor type work. And I'm talking about things that we were doing. We were doing more advisor work. We do a lot of stuff. And now the entire company's not pivoted. We've been doing AI in agriculture for like 5 years. So that was a natural progression. But what we did is just sort of double down on that. We believe that it is going to have a profound impact on everything. And so we pivoted our business around that, all in. And there's opportunities there, right, to do advise companies on strategy and stuff like that that have been really good. But there is a pivot that you have to make and change that adapt things that you have to adapt to. Yeah.
And AI obviously is one of the big things that is impacting this space, right? I mean, the ability to drive code through that, the ability to have, essentially a coding intern, if you want to. Somebody told me that recently, what do you think of AI? And they said it's the greatest intern I've ever had. So that's obviously changing a ton. And do you feel like that has been a blessing or a curse for you? Because obviously, with great change comes great opportunity.
Yeah.
But AI is an entirely different beast. And the consulting work you're doing, I'm sure you're killing it there. But there's not as much, it tends to be not as much production work right now. It's kind of like early internet era, right? Where we were just learning what we had.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we were like, oh my God, look at all this work that has, there's production work behind it.
Yeah, we're definitely early to the party. It's like going to that party that's like tells you to get there at 7:30 and you like maybe arrive at like 6:30 and the hosts aren't even there. And so you're talking with like the staff and like, hey, how you doing? And
you sound like you've done that before.
I like parties.
I've been at that. I've been early to the party too. I get it.
So yeah, that's what it feels like. So as it comes to AI, 2023 was, and this is across the industry. I'm not even going to, it's ubiquitous across all of them. 2023 is a lot of tire kicking, a lot of, I see some disruption, a lot of boards asking executive teams questions. Are we going to get disrupted? Is there an opportunity for us to disrupt? And those companies, by and large, I think the executives, I think there was a lot of discounting of AI, rightfully so. Let's see how this plays out. And, they a lot of internal investigations going on in terms of like, hey, let's investigate this internally and see if there's anything there. Let's do some POCs and see what the capabilities are. And I think that the companies, these companies that were giving that work internally just didn't have the capabilities really to do those evaluations. And so I think now that, you give it to an internal team, they probably take it, maybe not all that seriously, but what you get back isn't really what you expected. And maybe you got to present to the board and it's like, hey, they're going to ask a lot of questions and this doesn't scratch that itch. I needed a lot more. Probably the executives in their own investigations probably discovered more than what their internal teams were giving them. So now there's an awareness of, okay, we need to have a plan. I don't know if my teams have the capability to even come up with this plan because it requires some pretty deep AI knowledge to understand how do you marry that with use cases that we see valuable. And so now the market is opening up to, hey, we need some external help in understanding how to think about AI. What's the return on investment? Where do we place our big bets? And then, hey, do we build this capability internally? Do we want to own that? Is that part of our core business? Should we even own it? Or should we think about outsourcing that? How do we do it? So now 2025 is a lot of getting prepared and actually allocating budgets towards some of these initiatives. And so that's what we're seeing now. And so I'm glad, even though we were early to the party, waiting there for for 60 minutes beforehand and talking with the internal staff kind of really gave us an idea of kind of what was going on in the internal workings of it. So that's how I see 2025.
Yeah, I think this comes back to that client mindset shift. Like, you did a great job of recognizing that you got into AI too soon, and you knew that, and there weren't any budgets. So you started offering like sessions, ways to educate, to bring the market along to get to a point where they're ready to start to buy your services. But that's just a requirement, right? When you're early, if you take the West, you're going to take a few arrows at the same time. So
yeah, good point. And the funny thing too, yeah, there were no clients. So it's like, all right, well, we better be our own client. Let's create our own product. And that's what a large part of the investments for us for 2024 went into, was building our own AI product for agriculture.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, that's a great example where would you do that the same way again? Because you built something that was pretty powerful and it'll continue to serve you, but
yeah,
big investment at a really hard time.
Absolutely. So it did a couple different things. I've got all of these amazing engineers that I want to keep, and I need to keep busy. If they're on the bench not working on anything, they'll go crazy and they'll leave. And I don't want them to leave. I want to keep them busy working on stuff that they find, super interesting. And so this is where we just put our money where our mouth is and say, listen, nobody's going to spend on this yet because they don't see the opportunities yet, but we do. Let's go ahead and build this. That was, it solved two things. Number one, it gave us a tremendous amount of credibility because this application showed all of the things that we had to build and all of the lessons learned in going through and working with large language models, working with small language models, working with the agentic architectures and the orchestration and memory management and prompt optimization. I could go on and on and on. They didn't teach, none of this was out of the box. A year and a half ago, it was like, hey, you can connect to this thing called ChatGPT and they have an API and you can like do some prompt engineering and it's amazing. And no one said how bad these things hallucinate. No one said how challenging it is to get the results that you want in a non-deterministic system. So we ended up building all of that. And we're happy to do it and learning. And like, it was so much fun to go into there. So then when we came out and we're like, hey, we have a product and look how amazing it is. And look at all the things we've solved. And the use cases and the ROI is perfect for you. So as a product, it stands alone and we've got customers on that. But as a consulting firm, now we have a 18-month head start in solving the toughest challenges with the generative AI stuff. And now my team is equipped to be able to go into these meetings. I mean, we're going into billion-dollar companies and educating them on the right architectures, and not because we're holier than thou, but we're coming at it from an approach of, hey, you know what? We spent a lot of money, learning lessons, and these are hard lessons learned. So we're happy to share them with you. And just by sharing them, they're like, wow, that's great. And it's gotten us a lot of good opportunities. So I would do it all over again.
That's awesome. So many companies, when they go through a downturn, they just wait for, how do I get back to normal? And the best ones emerge as a different company. And I think what you're talking about there is you building something that, yes, it's hard, it was expensive, and it was challenging, but you were at the same time weathering a storm, and you were also moving into a new future space. So those things kind of come together, and pile on. And so that makes it really hard. But I'm glad to know that you guys have done that, and it's fantastic what you created. I do know that piece. So what are some of the things that you've learned going through this that you would not undo? So that's one example. You would still build the AI platform. Is there anything else that, once the market picks up, you go, nope, I run the business differently today because of what I've been through in the past?
Yeah, I would change. If you look at my two lists of things that you would, kind of in a retrospective, stop doing these, continue doing these, right?
Mm-hmm.
The stop doing is far bigger than the continue doing. I mean, we got some stuff right and made the right decisions there, but we just got a lot of stuff, wrong just from different mindset and experience and all of that type stuff. I think the preservation of capital and being on the defensive and being a little more tactical is really important in this type of environment. I think that, some of the challenges that you face, is downsizing a company is not fun. Every decision is awful. There is no good decisions. And so, people ask, like, how's it been? I know you guys have been kind of, trying to manage through this, just because a lot of our competitors who aren't in agriculture, they're sort of either flat or down a little bit. But because we're in agriculture, because our biggest clients were really hurt during the last 4 years, it had a substantial impact on us. And so it's been, people ask, well, what's that like? I'm like, well, it's probably like having the flu for 18 months.
Mm.
They're like, that sounds awful. I'm like, I know. There's glimpses of hope and stuff like that. So it's not all awful. But
for a little bit in the morning, you felt better for a while.
Yeah.
And then, no, I'm still sick.
Exactly. So that's the resilience piece of it that you just kind of figure and work through. And that's not for everybody. It really is not for everybody. You need a lot of support. If your spouse or your partner has to be pretty forgiving and understanding, because, there can be times where I'm like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Yesterday, I'm like, everything is wonderful and this is going to work out and I'm on a high. And then 8 hours later, it's like, oh, things aren't working out the way I thought it was going to be.
You bring up a really interesting point that a lot of people don't think enough about. And that is, what's the impact on personally, mentally, and on your family? That's every time somebody says to me, like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur and tell me all about how great it is. And I go, well, let's just sit down and talk for a second. So how did you personally manage through this? Because it's really hard on, hard on the ego, right? I mean, there's all kinds of
humbling
challenges.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's, I think that this is super interesting. When things were going really, really well, and I'll just, speak for myself. I don't know how it is for other entrepreneurs, but, things are going well. It's very easy to get caught up in the, hey, things are going well, things are going great, we're awesome. And, but what I realized even then, there's a little bit of an emptiness here. There's not a whole lot of a challenge in some ways. Like, where's the resistance? Where is the grit? Because you remember what it took to get there. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, this is pretty cool and things are going pretty cool. So I'm not going to think about that too much. And now managing through it, it's certainly humbling, which is good because, I needed big doses of that, because I'm not going to lie. There were moments where I'm like beating my chest being like, I'm pretty badass. But life becomes a lot more real. It's more rich. And as I'm managing through it, you start, there's just things like I've been more spiritual because I'm like, listen, I can't let stress or any of this, ruin me. And I can't let it ruin my family. And then I start looking at them like, you know what, you really, it's not a measurement. The true measurement of your character is not necessarily in how you get to how during good times, how well you did. Right. It's, or, how philanthropic you were, or, I mean, those are good and that's okay. But it's like, that's when things are really easy. It's easy to be good. It's easy to be philanthropic, and it's easy to be virtuous and all of these things. Well, it's not easy when things are going bad. And that's when it matters most. And so that's sort of what I've trying to be an anchor on. And that's the struggle is like, man, I've gotten hit, weeks in a row with bad news on things. But my daughter still needs my help to study. My little daughter still needs me to talk gibberish with her about different things because she's young. Right. And my wife still needs me to be interested in the things that she wants to talk about. My middle daughter's in college and she's got things that she wants to talk about. I have a brother. I have my parents. I've got employees. You've got this network. And what I found is, you know what, how I manage through this is really going to be, this is where what I want to measure is how well I manage through this. Mm-hmm. And so that becomes kind of a challenge, and I like challenges. And so, I'm really trying to focus on those things. And let me tell you, it's not easy, and I don't succeed at it all the time. In fact, I'm probably like batting 500 on that. If you ask my wife, I'm probably batting like 200, but
well, what I think is really interesting about that is I agree with you that it gets real. The bad times are the times when that's when you're truly measured. Your integrity is measured in a different level. And, to survive that, but listen to you talk about how it actually makes you better is really pretty inspirational. And I hope other people recognize that, because you're right. You're going to learn more about yourself going through something like that than you are when things are going really well. It does become really easy to just fall into a trap of believing that you're great. And of course you designed all of this and it's working exactly the way you thought it would. Right. And now reality steps in.
Yeah. And so if you were to ask the real question is would you change things? Like, would I change things? Like if I could go back and say, you know what, we were in a different industry. We didn't experience a downturn. Most reasonable people would be like, of course, I would just start from that point and just kind of rewind and start from there. I don't know if I would say that. I mean, there's a lot of character building, and it's there's some life lessons there that, even though it sucks, they're fulfilling, and it's hard to explain, but until you go through them, I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like, man, what I think about now is the story. The story is going to be so awesome. You know what I'm saying?
You know what? I remember that, Lawrence, when we were going through COVID. That was always your perspective, is I can't wait to tell the story of how we did this and how we came back. And so it's just such a great entrepreneur's mindset. And you've got that. You're clearly made for it. So, all right. So in closing, Lawrence, if we're just thinking about how you're going to advise some of the other leaders that are going through this, what are the top 3 things you'd say should be on their leaders list in being able to manage through a downturn like this?
I think one is having a network of people that you could bounce ideas off of, other entrepreneurs. I think that's really important. And that mix, I would get some folks that have been through some downturns. They're probably not operators anymore, but they were entrepreneurs and now they sit on boards. Man, pick their brains, because the wisdom that those guys can offer and the perspective is invaluable. So I think that's sort of one. Just play the defensive in the beginning. Don't immediately go to the offensive. Start on the defensive and, get comfortable with making painful decisions. I think that's sort of the big lesson learned there. The third one is more about is about yourself and preserving your own mental health and focus. There's opportunities to grow there. And I think that's one that it doesn't get talked enough. It's like, how does the business succeed? Well, how does the business succeed and the entrepreneur also succeed? And how do they come out healthier or with better mindset, a more mature mindset, more wisdom? And I think those are kind of the 3 top ones that now when I look back, that if I was to get into a fighting formation, if the market downturns again, those would kind of be the 3 things that would pop through my head most. I need to cover these 3 bases to get ready.
Yep. Man, I hope everybody recognizes how important it is to have you put things on their list, because those were great. And we love having you on here, and I just appreciate the time, Lawrence.
Hey man, I'm happy to share. I'm hopefully some folks get some value out of what I've said, and they kick butt and be able to go through the same things I have, the good things, and the bad things, because those are good too.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again, Lawrence.